Hello, a very warm welcome to our CGA career series. Today we're going to be talking about energy and climate change, and I'm really delighted that you could all join us today. My name is Carolyn Kissane, and I serve as the Academic Director of the Center for Global Affairs. And also, we've recently launched a new lab, the Energy, Climate Justice and Sustainability Lab, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later in today's session. But just to share with you a little bit of information about the CGA, we have two graduate programs, the MS in Global Affairs, as well as a recently launched MS in Global Security, Conflict and Cybercrime. We have an array of public events, such as the one we are having today. We also do events that look at sort of global affairs issues from a very contemporary lens, looking at our 8 concentrations and 3 specializations. These public events offer great opportunities for both our students and our CGA larger community to network and to expand their understanding of the critical issues of the day. And we also have professional pathways programs, non-degree courses, as well as non-credit certificate programs. So if anyone who's participating in today's session is interested in learning more, please do let us know, and we can send you lots of materials. But I know you're all joining today to hear from our great group of panelists. So today we're going to be talking about climate change and energy, and we're really fortunate to have 4 fantastic alumni back with us. We may have a 5th to talk to us about their careers, about their trajectories, and to share advice that they've received that has worked well as maybe advice that they would recommend that you don't follow. So let's, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So we have Sarah Busch, who is Director of Digital Strategy and Head of ESG Integration at Aperture Investors. Daniel Cohen, who is the Senior Originator and PJM Gas Trader at Talen Energy. Amanda Colombo, Project Development Analyst at Safari Energy. Delane Mayer, Project Manager of Full Cycle. And possibly Lewis Percy, who's Corporate Environmental Specialist, the City of Alberta. So 3 of our 4 panelists graduated in 2019, and Delane graduated in 2018. So we're gonna get started. And if anyone is interested in learning more about the CGA, please do follow us. Here's our Twitter, our Facebook, Instagram. We try to be as present as possible across those social media channels, but let's jump in. Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining me today. I've been especially excited about this conversation since I know you all well, and I have had you in classes over the years, and it's just really such a delight to see you all again. So to get us started, why don't you tell us about what you're currently doing and about your sort of pathway into your position. Sarah, why don't we get started with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm currently the head of ESG integration at Aperture Investors. We are a relatively new asset manager based in New York and London. Our firm launched in 2018. ESG meaning environmental, social, and governance. So it's really about sustainable investing. And for me, I wrote my thesis about sustainability, also partially about how to green the financial system. And, I realized the financial services industry is not there yet, not even close. But B, there's so much money in this industry. So there is a big opportunity on how to make a difference. So when I joined Aperture, I kind of built the ESG department, and I'm working with the different investment teams on integrating ESG elements and factors into the decision-making process and investing process, whether that's, reducing the carbon footprint, wastewater management, but also like worker safety, diversity. So everything that's kind of beyond the financial bottom line. So we're looking at partially divestment, so not investing in tobacco, controversial weapons, thermal coal. So there are several initiatives that I'm currently running on, how we can kind of change our investment process to be more sustainable. And then also kind of looking into different companies, because divestment is maybe not always the answer. Sometimes it's you're trading a firm that is maybe not great on the environmental side, but then they have horrible labor practice or corruption. So you're trading one thing for the other. So it's really about finding a company that is kind of best in their class, and who's making the transition to a more sustainable future. So engaging with this company and making sure that what we invest in kind of aligns with our personal values, but also, that we are part of being the change when it comes to global warming and really make a difference. So for me, ending up in the financial services industry was never what I thought I would do after CGA, but it's just a really exciting industry with a lot of opportunities, and I think a positive outlook looking into the future. I think you're on mute, Caroline.
I'm going to come back to you because of the ESG space is changing so rapidly. So it's a very exciting space to be working in. Amanda, why don't you tell us about what you're currently doing and a little bit about your trajectory since you've left the CGA?
For sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Amanda. I am a project development analyst at Safari Energy. Safari Energy is a CNI, which is commercial and industrial solar developer, mostly in the tri-state area, but we are nationwide, as well as Hawaii, which is really exciting to work on those projects. Basically, in my role, my primary responsibility is to push the projects through the pipeline, whether that's data analysis, policy incentive research, state by state, or getting designs to our design team, cost estimating, project finance, basically just being that glue to push the project down the pipeline. So that's my primary responsibility. And then secondary, I'm a member of the ADA team, which is artificial intelligence and data analytics. So it's basically an internal team that we create tools for just to make things more efficient within our team, using mostly Excel, but also Python. So doing some web scraping and things like that. So Safari Energy as a whole was acquired by PPL, which is Pennsylvania Power and Light, in 2018, which is a big utility. So they wanted to get into the renewable energy space. So that's why they acquired Safari. And we do CNI projects, like I said, about 1 megawatt to 10 megawatts. That's kind of like our sweet spot, but definitely a lot of projects in the tri-state area and then some in Hawaii, which is nice.
Excellent. And everyone should know Amanda is also the assistant coach of the NYU volleyball team. So in spare time, she's also coaching. So, and she did that also while she was in grad school. So I'm so glad that you're continuing to do it. Delane, why don't we move over to you? And Delane should also share with us that she recently won a very great award in a presentation that she made for her company. So why don't you go for it, Delane?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Delane Mayer. I am based in Brooklyn, but I work for a California-based biotech startup called Full Cycle Bioplastics. And Full Cycle turns mixed organic waste into a compostable and biodegradable bioplastic called PHA, or polyhydroxyalkanoate. As a project manager with Full Cycle, I work between our lab and our clients to help scale up the science, make sure that our R&D translates to something that is commercially viable. We are a startup, but we're doing pretty well. We inked our first licensee facility. So we'll be standing up a facility in New Zealand probably in the next 18 months, and we'll be building out our first California commercial facility, probably also in the same time frame. So it's exciting to come in kind of on the ground floor of a company that's doing really cool technological work, but also is commercially viable, which isn't always what happens in the startup world. Along that vein, and to Carolyn's point, in March, I won a semi-finalist pitch competition hosted by NASA. So NASA is also also looking for closed loop solutions for a number of projects related to lunar settlement development. And so I'm actually participating in the finalist round in a few weeks. Need to work on the video this weekend. So that's my homework for after this. But really just trying to translate the ethos of a closed loop circular economy designed system that works on Earth for solving different climate change related issues and scaling that down for a lunar settlement potentially.
That sounds very, yeah, very exciting. But
it sounds like science fiction, but it's real, I promise.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like science fiction, but I do also know it's real and it's very exciting. I had the pleasure of interviewing Talen, the two CEOs of her company, and it's a very exciting company. Maybe before I go to Daniel, could you just tell us, because maybe some people in the audience may not understand when you're saying full, like circular economy and full loop system?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the circular economy, what we're looking at is doing something different in our economic model. So the economic model of the 20th century is linear. It's take, make, waste is a good way to think about it. So you have a resource that's extracted, you use that resource and you throw it away. So we know that that doesn't work anymore. It actually creates a ton of inefficiencies in our system. And so when you think about food waste, for example, we're using energy, water, human labor to create food, and then we're throwing away 40% of food in the US every year. It's not an efficient system. So just by systems design, even if you don't care about climate change, you're not building something that's actually sustainable and built to last. And so the idea is, how can we close that loop? So what Full Cycle is doing is trying to solve for the food waste issue on the front end by taking that as a feedstock, turning it into a plastic alternative, this PHA, and using that instead. So something that biodegrades. We know that plastic is clogging our waterways, polluting our oceans, and it's not going away anytime soon. So it's solving for that front end problem of food waste and the back end problem of plastic pollution. So it's one example of a circular economy.
Excellent, thanks for that. All right, moving to you, Daniel. Why don't you tell us what you're doing right now? And I know I think you're in Texas, is that correct? Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's right. So first off, thank you to Professor Kissane and CGA for having us on today. Yeah, I'm located down here in Texas, in Houston. I've been here coming up on 2 years now. And so I work at a company called Talen Energy. We are an independent power producer with a footprint primarily within the PJM and ERCOT ISOs. We have everything from a nuclear station to fossil gen, including coal and natural gas-fired plants, as well as solar and wind up in our kind of New England presence. And yeah, I've been at the company for a year and a half now. I'm an originator, which is kind of a fancy word for business development. Essentially, we own and operate power plants that compete in wholesale power markets, which, as you guys probably learned, are very volatile, certainly in February in Texas. And one of the things that we try to do at my company is de-risk a lot of the inherent volatility in competitive power markets. So I work to kind of do derivatives and other types of structured products to further that end. In addition, I do trade a good amount of natural gas. We own and operate natural gas plants up in Pennsylvania area. So I'm tasked with kind of dealing with daily natural gas flows in and out of our plants.
Excellent. So I'm going to stay with you, Daniel, to go.
Sure.
Yeah, go to the next question. So what have you seen? What are you seeing that's changing in your own understanding of energy based on the position that you have? Like,
yeah, sorry. First thing I would say is kind of, Sarah could probably speak to this even better than I can, but the ESG movement as it relates to power companies and their access to capital markets is a huge driver right now. So you'll see that the lending rates for kind of traditional fossil-based gen companies are significantly higher than those with a renewable footprint, which is why I think you see a lot of these capital-intensive companies like a BP or Shell pivoting to renewables, because it's kind of a relatively cheap way to lower their cost of capital. So that'd probably be the first one that stands out. And then secondly, just the kind of voracious appetite for renewables into the grid. You see cost curves come down, and you just see the merit order and any ISO that you look at just get completely reshifted year over year.
Excellent, thanks for that. Yeah, and I want to come back to you also about your experience in February, because that was a pretty intense.
Sure. Yeah, I got a lot to say.
Okay, good. Okay, so maybe let's go to you, Sarah, because as I, what you mentioned earlier, what Dan just said, the ESG space is just, it's part of the vernacular, right? It's not, every company is thinking about it. Investors are, raising a lot of critical questions about what they're investing in, how they're investing. And it's I'm just curious to see how, within the context of your company, or how you're sort of seeing the shifts in the ESG landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me personally, like our company launched in 2018, and ESG is maybe when you launch a company, not the main thing that you focus on. It's more like just getting the company up and running. So I was originally really focusing on the digital marketing side, but of course, in a startup, you always have to wear multiple hats. So I raised my hand and I was like, I'm really interested in ESG. Can I build out this department? And there was, everyone was excited about it, but it was not a priority. So I signed up with the UN Global Compact, the PRI, really did a lot of research. And now we're actually at a point where it's kind of like the hot topic when it comes to investments. So everyone just keeps calling me. It's like, Sarah, what's the new thing? What we're doing on the ESG front? So it changed a lot just for our company, but I think also in a bigger perspective, with a lot of regulatory changes that happened in especially the last year or two, where in the European Union there currently is a new sustainable finance initiative that almost forces companies to really show like how green really are our investments, where you get certain grades for depending on how you invest. You're in different categories. Same with in the US under the Biden administration now, the SEC has a lot of appetite into ESG and really looking into companies trying to avoid greenwashing. Everyone right now is like, oh yeah, we're very sustainable, we're very ESG. But then when you actually look a little bit closer into the portfolios, it's maybe not always as sustainable as companies claim to. So I think over the upcoming months and years, this is just going to be a topic that's going to have more and more interest. And I think eventually we're going to be at a point where we don't call it ESG investing or sustainable investing anymore. It's just going to be investing, because that's where we're ultimately heading.
I'm going to come back to that. I keep muting myself. I have two boys next door who are like banging on the door throughout. Talen, why don't we go to you? I mean, plastics are a big topic. Lots of, Sarah spoke of what's happening in Europe around ESG, but there's lots of, single-use plastic bans. There's a lot of concern about plastic consumption and how to reduce it. So curious to see specifically how, your company and what you're doing, how you sort of see that the shifts in plastic use and what you're doing to change it.
Absolutely. Well, I think, full cycle bioplastics is the beneficiary of the change that Sarah and Daniel are talking about. We are the company now that Fortune 100 food manufacturers reach out to us. We don't call them, they call us and they say, we want to change our packaging. So can we work with you and figure out how to do that? And having a circular technology like ours enables us to actually work with companies to diminish their food waste and turn that into the product that their food comes in. So that's the kind of the ethos between how we work on different funded research projects with our clients. So we are very much the beneficiaries of a changing landscape in terms of ESG investing and companies that need to account for consumer demand for more sustainable products. So, there's obviously a policy shift happening in the United States and much more so in Europe as well towards plastic bans. You mentioned single-use plastic. Interestingly, a number of single-use plastic bans also, they're not nuanced enough to keep bioplastics out of that mix. So on the policy side, there actually is a need to have a more nuanced definition of what a plastic is. You know, we want to keep the plastics that are compostable and actually biodegradable in the supply chain. I think those are some kinks that will work themselves out over time as the technology and the policy pieces start to come together more.
Great. Dylan, why don't you put your, because you recently had a published piece in The Hill. It would be great if you could put that in the chat. So our audience
absolutely.
can access it. Thank you. So over to you, Amanda. Solar, right? Lots of interest in the solar space. As Dan said, you know, the price picture has changed quite rapidly, right? And you're working predominantly here in the tri-state area. Can you give us a picture of sort of how you're seeing the solar penetration change?
Yeah, for sure. Just going back to pricing, like I really see, you know, steel prices are pretty high right now. So that definitely affects the industry. We do everything from ground mount to roofs to canopies, parking decks, anything you can think of really. So steel pricing is definitely something that affects us directly. As far as policy goes, you see states implementing really great programs, like New Jersey has a TREC program that's about to end this summer. And now everybody's kind of on the fence to see where that goes next, if it'll be a more aggressive policy or a little bit of a step back from what it was, since it was a great incentive. So yeah, the RPS is the renewable portfolio standards of each state are changing rapidly. And, you know, that's not the only factor too. For example, in Georgia, they don't even have a renewable portfolio standard, but Georgia Power is a utility that is really determined to get renewables on the grid, which is great. So you can see the pricing and policy, you know, basically go hand in hand for sure. Mm-hmm.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to just sort of shift gears a little bit. I know many of the people that are on joining us today are sort of curious to know, like, the work that you're currently doing. What are some of the skills, or how is it? What does your company look for when hiring? Amanda, why don't we stay with you?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Number one, I think, is passion for the industry. You know, when you go on interviews, people can sense that pretty much at the get-go. If you're passionate about climate change, passionate about, you know, sustainable investing, renewable energy, anything that you have a passion for, I think people definitely pick up on. And then secondly, I would say quantitative skills in general, whether that's data analytics, being really good at Excel, financial modeling, those are all really good skills to have. So I know for me personally, I started grad school more on the qualitative policy side, and then I really, you know, switched up to a more quantitative curriculum, which really helped me in the long run.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I think for us, because we are a startup, you know, the typical startup job profile is, I think you have to be able to take on responsibilities really fast, whether you're comfortable with it or not. You always have to go beyond your job description. So even if you're hired for a certain position, that also means that you still have to be able to support your team members in the company, be able to wear multiple hats at the same time, still within a reasonable amount of hours in a week. And I think, you know, overall, just being really curious beyond just what you do. So for me, it's, you know, always talking to our compliance team, seeing like, how does the legal side of things look, talking to our investment team, like, how do we actually build our portfolios? Like, you always need to really understand what everyone in a company is doing to get a better understanding of your own position, how you can work with your teammates to produce the best results. So I think really staying curious and always learn, and just be, you know, driven and exciting about your job.
Wonderful, thank you. And Talen?
Yeah, I think, I work in the business development unit of a company that is otherwise all scientists and engineers. So if you are not the scientist or engineer, you have to be scientifically literate. You have to be able to do that science translation of what's happening in the lab to someone who maybe has no hard science background or only cares about the bottom line. So within that, communication and strategy is really important. We kind of joke that our growth team, and when we get together with the engineers, that's where possibility and reality collide, sometimes favorably, sometimes not favorably, right? Like what can happen in the lab could be a limitation on what we are able to sell, and vice versa. We want to sell the dream of a plastic-free solution. And so having that ability to play that high level chess game almost is really important. I don't know how you would quantify that as a hard skill, but we'll call it chess for this purpose.
Excellent, thank you. I have many questions to come back for all of you, but Dan, what about you? And if you could also, I think what you experienced in February, and if you want to sort of share with us all, sort of give us a little bit of background and how even in your company, it would have been hard to have been really prepared for what you experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. First, just to circle back to the last question, I would agree with all of the things that the other panelists have said. Certainly, data and sort of quant-based skills are becoming ever more premium. I do not have a quant background, but you do need to have that ability to understand data and not just the data results, but also the influx of data. We deal in a very sort of data-centric industry. So that's the ability to kind of manage your time and the flow of data is critical. And then the last point I would say before turning to February is the ability to kind of maintain focus on the big picture. It's very easy to get down into the nitty gritty of your specific project or a particular data point that you're looking at, but you have to understand sort of how it fits into the larger sort of scheme or business that you're actually operating in. So that would be my kind of advice or takeaways. But yeah, looking to February, it was a doozy here in Texas for sure. I guess I'll start personally and then I'll extend out to my company and my business. But I was home alone with the dog, no power, no water, no heat. The inside temperature of my house, I read down to a low of about 37 degrees. So it was chilly, no question. But everyone was in this together. You'd think being kind of, I'm from New York, you'd think being a northerner would be a little bit more palatable, but it doesn't matter where you are when it's 15 degrees outside, that's just cold. From a business perspective, we had a lot of the challenges that you've read about in every newspaper. We own gas plants here in Texas, mostly down the Corpus Christi area, and we had kind of issues up and down the logistics chain. We had issues getting gas out of the ground. We had issues getting gas flowing to our plants. And then even once at our plants, they weren't always cooperating. So it was very, very dicey. ERCOT instituted a $9,000 per megawatt hour cap, 24 hours a day for, I think it was about 5 days. And that's real dollars when you're short or long hundreds and hundreds of megawatts. So it was a super challenging environment. A lot of us lost sleep, but thankfully we were able to pull through. But yeah, the market is either going to need to change demonstrably, or it's going to go through a similar cycle again. A little bit of background here. Unlike other power markets where you have some sort of capacity mechanism that pays for plants to weatherize, here in Texas, there's no such mechanism. So effectively, you as a plant owner would have to pay out of pocket for what might be a once every 10-year phenomenon. And every plant owner has had to kind of reassess whether or not that's been worth it.
Wow. Yeah. It was all over, of course, it was all over the news, all the newspapers, was front page. So you pointed out that, right, like it's kind of a moment of deciding in terms of what's going to change and what's not going to looking forward. I'm just curious because my next question was going to be about some of your CGA experiences.
Sure.
But your thesis, you specifically looked at ERCOT in Texas. So did you find that helped you did you find yourself kind of going back to that in your own sort of making sense of what definitely from someone who was far away, it looked like a very sort of the situation was crazy.
Yeah, so my thesis project looked specifically at sort of the economics underpinning potential wind plus storage within the ERCOT market. And again, because there's no capacity here, you really, as a generator, you only get paid for what you deliver to the grid. So it was a super helpful project just to kind of get a baseline understanding of how the market that we operate in functions from a very high level. And then kind of the ability to understand the price drivers in this kind of market environment, whether it's gas prices, whether it's load, whether it's wind production, all these sort of multifaceted elements that drive price. And the more you can kind of understand price in normal times, kind of preps you for what to pay attention to when the market starts acting irrationally or when weather doesn't cooperate. So absolutely, my thesis project was a great baseline to kind of build the rest of my understanding.
Great. And anything else at the CGA that you'd like to, or, from your educational background that sort of has helped you in your position?
Yeah, absolutely. I think CGA was great in that the majority of my professors were adjuncts. It was great to have exposure to industry. It was not only great in the classroom, but also yielded all sorts of benefits, going for a happy hour or going to lunch or just having conversations about breaking into an industry or pivoting, having people with real exposure to the types of positions that I was interested in kind of assuming was totally mission critical for me. And beyond that, you hear this everywhere, but it is your network. So being at CGA, I had good relationships with everyone on this call, as well as people beyond. And I hope that those continue to kind of pay dividends throughout the rest of my career.
Great, thank you. Sarah, why don't we go to you in terms of, were there any specific classes or experiences that you had as a graduate student that you felt really sort of helped you, not just in terms of what you're doing and just when you think back along your pathway?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, like before CGA, I was working in media. So I just realized what I'm doing right now, I'm not happy with. And I was always fascinated with international relations, but also energy, but didn't really know what to do with this interest. So going to CGA, it's a really fascinating community of a lot of people from all over the world who come together from different industries, different backgrounds. So I think just, being there was just enriching. But what I really like about it, that every class is very unique, but they all tie in together. So I really enjoyed, I could pretty much name every single class right now, but like Michael Schenk or Bill Hewitt are really fantastic people when it comes to the environment and energy. Carolyn Kissane is always organizing like extra classes or kind of get together networking events, events with industry leaders. But then you also have classes where in the beginning I was like, I don't know if I really like that, like corporate finance, or when it really goes into analytics. But it's like the professors, the way they share their knowledge makes it actually very tangible and easy to understand. And now I ended up working in finance. So, having kind of all those classes meld together and you really get an understanding of what, in my case, like what does sustainability mean and what can we do on not just a personal level, but also on a professional level to kind of combat climate change together. And then of course you have, like the fun classes like the GFIs where you go into a different country and study there for a week or two. So I went to Bolivia, which gives you a really interesting understanding of the way we talk about sustainable development in a developed country might look very different than when you are in Bolivia and you see it from a very different perspective. So really just getting this very diverse understanding of sustainability, energy, climate change was just a very unique experience.
Excellent. Well, Professor Powers is hoping that we can take students back to Bolivia. So we're really looking forward to being able to restart our global field intensives, which of course, during COVID have been on hold. But if things continue to go well, we'll be back traveling again in January of 2022 with our first GFI. So fingers crossed. Amanda, how about you? You know, you said earlier that you came in and you were more sort of qualitatively focused and then sort of transitioned more to quantitative work.
Yeah, for sure. So I came to CGA right out of undergrad. So I was definitely one of the younger bunch, but just to reiterate what Sarah said, like people from all walks of life come to CGA. It was a really amazing community to, number one, learn from, and then number two, obviously make connections. I would say the qualitative to quantitative switch for me was really possible by the specialization in data analytics with Professor Cohen. I think not only building the skill of learning how to actually write code in Stata, but also understanding what the data is telling you. For example, data is nothing without the picture, kind of what Dan said. You have to be able to understand what the numbers are telling you, and then, paint a picture to somebody who's not, great at reading data, or, whatever the case may be. So yeah, so I definitely, that specialization helped. And then I have to mention Epic. Epic was an amazing opportunity. Lewis isn't here, but Lewis and I ran Epic our last year, the Environmental Energy Policy International Club. And that definitely gave me some leadership skills that I kind of just fell into. And I think that definitely helped with connections and everything like that. So yeah.
Great. Well, Epic is still up and running. In fact, they ran the mentoring networking night on last Friday,
Amazing.
and they had a good crowd, and it was really wonderful in terms of doing breakout sessions and having some great speakers join. So you left it strong, and it's continuing to be strong. Talen, how about you? Now you came in, you were doing, if I'm not mistaken, you came in not doing energy, but doing international development. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had never really thought about climate change or energy or environmental issues significantly before CGA. So the number one feedback there is go into all of your classes with an open mind. And if you hear good things about faculty, go follow those faculty and do what they're doing. You can be, that's how I ended up in a number of Carolyn's classes. And that's why I ended up in the energy concentration. And that's why I love my job in bioplastics now. And that's a very, linear progression. It didn't feel linear at the time, and it still feels a little all over the place, but I think CGA and NYU especially offer so many cool opportunities that when you hear good things about specific people or courses, go do those good things. Like, the information is there, so follow it. Something else that I loved when I was at CGA was starting Global Affairs Review, which is the peer-reviewed academic journal. And that really opened the door for me in terms of being able to communicate and ability to do storytelling, research, writing, editing, some of those qualitative skills that are still really important, even in a quantitative field or a quantitative job, because people want to know that you can think critically. And being able to point to a writing sample that is peer-reviewed and published can be the make or break between you and someone else who doesn't have a writing sample like that. So if you can get your work out there, that's how you start to build credibility for yourself as well in a network that is full of really smart, interesting people. So you have to figure out ways to set yourself apart.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, because in an earlier careers event that we did, which was on gender and development, one of the panelists said that looking back, what she would do differently, because it's interesting, because it's kind of taking what Daniel said and what you just said, Talen. She said that she would do less networking and more writing, more publishing. But I think it's a matter of not either or, but kind of both ends, that, if you can kind of build your writing and think about yourself as, as opportunities to publish, right? Either through the Global Affairs Review or through other publications, or building a profile kind of on social media in an area around energy, climate change, and kind of setting yourself apart, I think is important, as well as doing the networking.
And to add to that too, this is something that I've told, students who are writing their theses, that being a student is one of the only times in your life where companies and people will open their door for you just because they want to help you. That opportunity kind of closes as soon as you're looking for a job, and it becomes very clear that this is a transactional relationship, right? That someone's trying to get something from you or you from them. So use your thesis or your writing to your advantage. Go interview companies and throw that quote in your paper and then email it back to them and be like, this really made a difference, like got an A on this and I'm super interested in the topic, would love to keep the conversation going. Like that's how you marry those two things, I think, of the publishing and the networking. Use one to leverage the other.
Yeah, no, I just heard that yesterday because this is thesis capstone presentation week, and so two students that I supervised that did their project looking at climate defense. So and use the sort of theory of securitization and climate defense, but they had interviews with two very senior admirals in the U.S. military, and they said that because they were graduate students and had an NYU connection, they found it much easier to sort of one, reach out, and for both of them to say, yeah, be happy to chat with you. And I think you are correct that while you're in graduate school and you're curious and your curiosity is driving your questions and driving, reaching out to people, I think many doors will be opened to you. So we're going to do some fun questions. So best, worst career advice. So the advice that you feel compelled that you want to share with everyone, or it's like the advice that, please don't follow it. It was terrible. Like they had no idea what they were talking about. So take one or both. Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think the worst one was probably just suck it up. It's just a job. It's like, yes, of course, you should always, try to maybe make it better or have some kind of change. But if you're miserable every morning, you have to put your mental health first. And it is something that you do every day, at least 8 hours. And I think the best one for me was just be bold and take risks, because the worst thing is, you fail and that's a learning experience, but it always pays off to just take the risk.
Great. Love that. Thank you. I'm taking notes as well. I'll be sharing with students over the years. Amanda?
Yeah, Sarah, you took my worst one. That was my worst one. Just suck it up and keep going. That's, I think, the worst advice that I got. The best, I would say, is managing your time the right way is really important, especially I think when you get into, or you're going into the workforce from an academic background or from school, grad school, undergrad, whatever. I think managing your time, whether you want to do mornings for meetings or planning out your day, I think that that's probably the best career advice I got, because, if you're not organized at the end of the day, it's going to be a problem for sure.
Great, thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I don't want to undo what Sarah and Amanda said, but work is work. I think you need to go in with that understanding. That's not to say that you should wake up every day and hate what you do, but there are going to be days, it's going to fluctuate. There are going to be days where you're really frustrated by a project that you're on, or you hate dealing with that particular coworker, but work is work, and you got to put in your time and suck it up to some extent. But at the same time, you got to do something that you find interesting. If there isn't a mental stimulation, then it's going to be just brutal and painful. And the other thing is definitely always advocate for yourself. You don't get what you don't ask for. Unlike being a graduate student where everyone is anxious to help you and lend you a hand, when it comes to your actual career, people are less willing to extend you favors. And I had one more, if I can remember it. Oh, goodness. Which is to never back away from a conversation, whether it's a work conversation or personal conversation. You never know who you're going to meet or what topics you might cover. I'm not the greatest networker. It was always a big push outside of my comfort zone to go to a lot of networking events or take a lunch or take a meeting, but they are super important. And I can't stress enough that you really have to just flex that muscle as much as you can.
Great, love that, thank you. And I like the fact that not everyone's in agreement. That's good. I think we should have diversity of opinion here. So good. Delane?
Yeah, I would say, move through your career with both confidence and humility. And what I mean by that is, I think Sarah's example of seeing that ESG work wasn't really being done and she had an interest in it. And so she said, can I do this? And now it's really important in her company is a great highlight of, if you see a gap, don't assume that someone else is going to fill it. Advocate for yourself and be the person who's going to do it, and then grow that so that it is strategically important to the company. And at the same time, have humility in doing it. If you don't know how to do something, I think it's better to ask than to kind of fudge your way through it. And so, yes, do your research. Google is a free source. Go do your homework on something. But I think it's really important today, especially in industries that are intersectional and cross-disciplinary, to seek outside opinion. And maybe there's a better way of doing something that someone from a different background might have insight on.
Excellent. So Delane, to stay with you, is there, so Delane is also, she didn't have enough academic work with doing her master's. She's also doing space resources now at the Colorado School of Mines. But can you share with us, and this is for everyone, kind of a skill or something that you're seeking to learn or develop?
Yeah, so I am working on a second master's degree in space resources. So the skill there is space mining. I probably won't be doing that directly, but I think the skill that comes out of that is to think about industry adjacent work. So I had never, similarly to how I had not thought about climate change or energy, I'd never thought about aerospace. So it's interesting that these two fields seem to be where I have landed for the moment. We'll see what I'm doing in 5 years. Maybe it's math or something totally different. But I think if you can find intersectionality in your work, not only does it make you a more interesting and open-minded thinker, but it also makes you a more interesting applicant. So when I was interviewing for the job that I currently have, the fact that I could point to being in school again, being curious, intellectually curious, and hardworking in terms of juggling full-time job and full-time schoolwork, that sets you apart from other people. And because it is space that I think is objectively interesting to most people, or at least it's weird, but it makes you stand out in a crowd. And so if you can find those little tweaks in your resume that make you interesting, you need to find those and you need to play those up too. Like the weird hobby that you have is something that people want to talk about. We can all talk about spreadsheets. It's not that exciting. Tell me what you do and how you think about that.
Excellent. Amanda, anything that you're working on now, something that you're trying to learn or develop?
Yeah, so definitely seconding, Delane's point to being intersectional. My job is basically to push projects through the pipeline. So I deal with a lot of different departments. So my mission, especially within the next couple of months, is to understand the more engineering side of things, why we need to know where the inverter goes, more of the technological aspects of the project, and being well versed in that, so that if someone from the business development team goes, hey Amanda, why are we putting the inverter here, and then I can say, oh, this is why. So definitely flexing that muscle.
Great, thank you. And Daniel?
Yeah, specific ones that I work on regularly are always kind of developing and sharpening my financial acumen, everything from accounting to option valuation to financial modeling. It sounds very basic, but it can always be more complex and enhanced. And then, like Amanda, the engineering side, I have no formal engineering background, but I work in a very engineering centric industry and company. So when I first joined, there were a gazillion conversations that were just flying right over my head about, various turbines, and we own a nuclear plant, so that's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, trying to have conversations with actual on-the-ground engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and understanding sort of the literal nuts and bolts of what we do and what we own, as a way to kind of further my understanding of that big picture.
Great, thank you. And Sarah?
I think for me, it's really getting even better understanding of the investment side, because I do work with the investment teams a lot of the time, and I think it is important. I'm trying to convince them that ESG is something that they need to consider, and I trying to change the way they think about the investment process. I also need to understand the process. I need to understand the financial math behind it. I need to be able to look at the spreadsheets and the balance sheets and like all that and be like, okay, this is where they're coming from. So I think, really getting a better understanding there. And then also when it comes to credentials, as Talen was saying, you always have to be curious and be willing to learn more and put more effort into what you're doing. So last year I became a registered representative. But pretty much you have to do a bunch of credentials and then you're a financial advisor. So I did that just because I realized don't really know what that means. So I just put in the time and the work to now actually when I have conversations with people in the industry, I actually know what they're talking about and I can say something, semi-interesting as a response. And then this year, I also want to get my CFA ESG credential, which is, an additional like 100+ hours of studying. And, this is nothing that anyone requires me to do, but I think, if you want to do a good job at your job, you just have to put in some extra time to, find ways on how to improve your knowledge.
Excellent. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, actually last week, we did an event looking at the upending of the energy landscape, and we had Bethany Gorham, who's with Orion Energy Partners, and she's working in their ESG space, and she was talking also about that, how, sort of you have to stay ahead of it, right? Because it is changing quite, as you pointed out, it's changing. So that's great that you're taking those steps. Just to stay with you, Sarah, is there a book, a podcast, something, a website you recommend that that our audience tap into?
Even after a year, still didn't figure it out.
We're all still doing it.
So I think, for people who are or might be interested in sustainable investing, there's this podcast called ESG Insider. It's from S&P Global. And they talk about every week about different themes in sustainable investing, which I think is really interesting. And then in general, like a book that I loved during my studies and also now is Paul Hawken, The Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. When you get too depressed about global warming and climate change, you can always look at this and it's like, okay, there are solutions. We just have to follow them.
Excellent. Two great suggestions. Thank you. Daniel?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give two book recommendations. One is Smaller, Denser, Lighter, Faster, Cheaper by Robert Bryce. And it's kind of all about the sort of costs, drawdown, synergies, advancements that we're seeing in kind of the cross-technological space, but certainly a lot of applications to energy. And then the second one, which is one I read last year, is called Prisoners of Geography. I can't remember the author, but it's a really interesting kind of level set on how societies are shaped by their physical borders and maps, and I would recommend it for any and all CGA students.
Excellent. Two great suggestions, and Robert is great. We've done some events with Robert in the past, and well, so Chris Peterson, right? He was like practically like a follower of Robert Bryce through all he was at
yeah, I think he's like his first editor.
Yeah. Excellent. Amanda?
Yeah, I've been loving the Clubhouse app. It's kind of new. So basically you need an invite. If anybody needs an invite, you can reach out to me. Someone on the app has to invite you to it, but two really great groups that I follow. First is Canary Media. They are a group out of GTM. They have really good clubhouses, which is basically you just listen in and it's like a live podcast. And then the second is the Climate Club, and that's Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, I've been loving Clubhouse. It's a really great app, really easy to use.
I'm so glad that you recommended Canary Media, right? Because that was Green Tech Media, right? And so they've transitioned over, but yeah, they do really great work. And you're enjoying the Climate Club as well?
Mm-hmm. Climate Club, yep. Mhm.
Okay, good, thank you. Talen?
Yeah, I think one good podcast is Reversing Climate Change by Nori. So they highlight different climate solutions in every episode. And then two books that I would recommend. One is the biography of Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. And however you feel about him, I think it's an important read because increasingly billionaires are the ones who shape our industries and the technology that we use. And so obviously he's not the only billionaire that's doing that, Jeff Bezos. And I think having insight into the worldview that some of these people have helps to understand why technology is being developed the way that it is. So obviously Tesla from a sustainability perspective, and SpaceX for me from an aerospace perspective, seeing how all of these industries fit together through one person is really fascinating. And then the second recommendation would be a book by Lulu Miller, who I think produced Radiolab, and the book is called Why Fish Don't Exist. And it's a look at the biologist, I think his name is Jordan, David Starr Jordan, and he was the first president of Stanford. And it looks at the kind of the history of taxonomy, his life. There's a weird murder and true crime angle to it. There's eugenics in it. It covers a lot of ground through the view of one person. And I think too, when we think about science and climate change, it's sometimes very cut and dry and we forget to look at the human aspect of it. And so looking at even the history of how the environmental movement ties into the eugenics movement is a really fascinating one. So if that's something that is of interest, I would highly recommend.
Excellent recommendations. I saw something yesterday that in the lead up to, because Elon Musk is going to be on Saturday Night Live, I think tomorrow night, and that it's shifting the value of cryptocurrencies, right? In terms of, how it's the direction that it's going to go. So it's kind of funny. So I've given our esteemed panelists a final challenge, and that is to create their own personal billboard with either a kind of an energy climate change message that will be shared by thousands of people will have the opportunity to read it. So I'm curious as to what each of them has come up with. Sarah?
I think I would actually take the message of, I believe it was Guy McPherson who said that, the scientist. If you really think that the environment is less important than the economy, try holding your breath while counting your money.
Wow, that's a powerful one. Okay, I like that. That's excellent. Okay, thank you. Amanda.
Yeah, I went with a little bit more general aspect, but I went with your daily habits matter. I know that, systematic change is something that we need to get to for climate change adaptation, but at the same time, how we buy things, especially in this country, overconsumption culture, super, super important. So if you can save that, water bottle by using a reusable or something like that, I think people should know that, yeah, daily habits matter no matter how small.
Yeah, it's great. And I think it's interesting that you say that also in we're still in the midst of COVID, right? A terrible global pandemic, but we did see, in 2020 that, carbon emissions went down, and much of that was the result of a very dramatic shift in behavior and habits, right? Not traveling for the most part, less commuting to work, lots of just a shift, and it resulted in reduction in carbon emissions. So unfortunately, we're starting to see the rebound take place. But Daniel?
Yeah, I would say, I guess I'll go optimistic here. It would read, human nature is to find a path around the object in our way. So looking at climate change and all the kind of struggles that are facing us as a country and as a society and a globe, I do think that we'll find a way around it. It'll be challenging, it'll be expensive, it'll be uncomfortable, but I'd like to think that between innovation and market structures and hopefully the goodwill of society, we will continue to kind of work towards solutions to these issues.
Great. Yeah. And just on that, positive note, I think, this year, just even the start of 2021, right? We're not even 6 months in yet. We've seen a real real movement momentum towards around climate change, right? Clearly a shift in the United States, but globally, countries committing to net zero, net neutrality, as well as companies, right? And Daniel, you pointed out like BP, so many different companies are kind of like really their investments in the renewable energy space and sort of thinking more integratively around what they do as energy companies. So great. Delane?
I mean, I feel like we should end on Daniel's high note, but I guess going back to Amanda's point, I would put on a billboard, is it sustainability or is it consumerism? And I think a lot of what we see today is this idea that you have to throw out your entire wardrobe and buy something new with sustainable products. And it's really just like, just wear what you have, just use what you have. And so when we're thinking about individual action, obviously voting matters too, but in terms of our own personal consumption, I think it's easy to get wrapped up in all of the products that are now being sold to us as better, when really just use what you have until you really can't use it anymore. And it's about changing our mindset in terms of throwing away things or keeping them until they've really completed the end of their life cycle, and then considering what that life cycle, what that end of life looks like.
That's great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. It was I have to say, it was a very special treat for me to see you all and to hear about your careers and all the great things that you're doing and the changes that you're making and your contributions to what's happening in the energy space, addressing climate change. So grateful to all of you. Thanks for taking the time, and to everyone who joined us today. Grateful to you for taking an hour out of your day to learn about careers in the energy and climate change space. Please do join us for future events. Anyone wants to learn more about the energy and environment concentration at the CGA, feel free to reach out to me at ck56@nyu.edu, and I'd be happy to set up a meeting and tell you about all the interesting things that are going on. So thanks again, everyone. Please do take care. Have a safe and good weekend. Stay healthy, and really wonderful to see you.